All right, well, welcome back, everybody. We are now here with our guest, Michael Christie, who is the Executive Director of the Children's Advocacy Centers of Michigan. He has a really important job. He's one of our, biggest allies as a Children's Advocacy Center here in the state of Michigan. So thanks for being on the show, Michael. We appreciate you taking some time.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Cool. So do you want to just maybe do a quick introduction of who you are and, what you do, how you came to CACMI?
Sure. Yeah, like you said, I serve as the Executive Director for CACMI. That stands for the Children's Advocacy Centers of Michigan. I've been here for 3 years, and really what motivated me to come and work in this space is I'm a father of 3 children, and I'm really a passionate advocate of this model. I think if any of my kids needed a response, if they were being abused, having a CAC available is exactly the thing I would want for them. And so really, being a part of this, it's just it's something that is exciting. Making sure that every child in Michigan, no matter where they are, have access to these resources if they're needed. So I have 3 kids, I have 2 dogs, and I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I think that's all there is to say about me for now.
Right. Well, perfect. That's a great segue into our icebreaker. So we're going to get to learn a little bit more about you. So Sarah's going to pull up our high-tech wheel.
Mm-hmm. Did you know there would be a wheel, Michael, when you agreed to be a guest on our show?
Idea. I'm excited and a bit nervous. Wow.
Yeah, this is important stuff. So I'll go ahead and spin the wheel and we'll see what question you get, okay?
Okay.
All right. What skill or talent would you most like to learn?
Wow. That is a really great question.
Thank you.
I love building or creating, and I would love to be more handy. Whenever I do something around the house, even if it's just something small like hanging a picture, I feel this huge sense of accomplishment, right? And so I think if I were to be able to develop a skill, it'd probably be just to be better at that. Honestly, like to build a house or even like a shed or a doghouse. That would be amazing. And it's really sort of beyond my skill set right now. But if I could learn something, that would probably be it.
I love that. Yeah, start small with the doghouse and then build up to a human house.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Maybe birdhouse, doghouse, shed. I think that's the trajectory of house building.
Have a couple squirrels in our yard, and we've thought about making a feeder for them. So maybe that's where I'll start.
There you go.
Yes. Good idea. We'll look forward to Houses by Michael Christie in maybe the next 2 years.
Maybe.
All right, awesome. So our first question, Michael, was just what's the role of CACMI in the mission here in the state of Michigan?
Yeah. Well, so the Children's Advocacy Center of Michigan, CACMI, we're really the network of CACs in Michigan. And so our mission, like the mission of CACs, really starts with the health and safety and protection of child victims of abuse, right? And so ensuring that those children have access to the resources they need to heal, that's really our why. That's why we do everything we do. And so, one of the things that we know is that child abuse is way more common than most people think. There's study after study showing that it's just shockingly common. The CDC says that at least 1 in 7 children are victims of abuse, at least. When Kaiser Permanente and the CDC did that famous ACEs study a couple decades ago, they found that just over 20% of the people who responded to their survey said they had been victims of child sexual abuse in particular. So it's everywhere. It's in every neighborhood, no matter the demographic. We see that day in, day out at CACs across Michigan. And so that's incredibly motivating to do something about that. It's such a huge problem. And so, you know, how we work, really our role isn't in direct service. The CACs, you all at Small Talk and other CACs work with children and families directly. You're taking their statements, you're providing trauma therapy, you're advocating for services, you're doing all of that important work. We're really sort of behind the scenes, and our role is really to help ensure that those services are accessible to kids, and that as much as possible, we're promoting quality services at CACs. And so that's really our role, and we do that in a few different ways. We do program consultation, and so if there's a community that comes to us and says, we would like to have a CAC in our community, we work with them to develop a plan so that they can build out a program that could be accredited eventually, so that they would be a CAC. And we do a lot of training. Last year, for example, we did a year-long cohort with our CAC mental health clinicians in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, really a gold standard therapy for victims of abuse. So we do those things with CACs, and we advocate for public policy that would really make sense for the kids and families that we work with at CACs. So for example, a few years ago, we successfully advocated for legislation that would allow for better information sharing between agencies who are involved in these child abuse investigations. So we're sort of behind the scenes. That's really our work, but really together with the CACs, our collective goal is really to help these kids who have experienced abuse really get back to being kids. That's sort of why we're in this, I think.
That's great. And that kind of leads into our next question of, like, why are CACs so important, and how do they help kids to heal in a way that maybe is different from other agencies?
Yeah. It's a great question. I told you earlier that I just love the CAC model. It's really recognized as the best model for a community to respond to child abuse. It was really actually started by answering the question, how do we keep these kids from repeated exposure, from having to describe the details of their abuse over and over again, right? I mean, that was really the impetus for the whole CAC model itself. And so that's really sort of where it starts, why it's so important. So without a CAC, a child may have to describe the details of their abuse to this professional and this investigator and that person in all these different places over a period of days or weeks, maybe even months. And we know that that can be incredibly traumatic for the child. And we also know that abuse impacts families in a lot of different ways, right? And so really for the family to have to find all of those sort of resources for their child independently without maybe a lot of help, that's not helpful or supportive to the child's healing. And so right off the bat, the model itself was designed explicitly to reduce the trauma the child would have to go through the investigative process. And then, of course, CACs are such great places for resources for those families. So CACs have advocates who connect with the family and talk to them about how they might be able to support their kid and help them to understand what their kid might be going through. Connect them to resources that they may really need now. And then the court process can be such a mystery, and just sort of knowing what to expect, having an advocate stand side by side with those families and help them through that process. I think it's a game changer for them. And then on top of that, to have access to trauma therapy that's evidence-based for free. All of that is free. It's accessible to families. And so I think having all of that in one place so that the family doesn't have to go searching from place to place, it's all right there at the Child Advocacy Center. It really is the best model for addressing child abuse. So I think that's why a CAC is so important. And in terms of how they look in Michigan, right now there are about 40 CACs in Michigan across the state, serving most of the counties in the state of Michigan. About 90 to 95% of the population has access to a CAC if needed. And last year, CACs saw over 11,000 kids to take their statement following an allegation or disclosure of abuse. 11,000 kids. That's equal to like 0.5% of all kids living in Michigan. Just in 1 year, 0.5% of all kids living in Michigan came to a CAC following an allegation or disclosure of abuse. And so CACs in Michigan play a really important role, just by virtue of how many kids they see. They play a really important role in helping those kids and families to get beyond what happened.
Well, thank you for that information. We at Small Talk have been working really hard trying to make sure that we're still able to provide like telehealth services, and we've been trying to get our teleforensic interviews going again too. So we were also wondering, what are some other ways that CACs are still able to serve children across the state?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, one of the things we know that reports of child abuse during the stay-home order have dropped dramatically, and we know that during because of the stay-home order, kids don't have access to those sort of safe and trusted adults who might notice something about the child, who the child might feel comfortable talking to. And so we also know that 90 to 95% of abuse happens at the hands of someone who really knows the child and has an active relationship with the child. And so the abuser might be living with the child, and the child is stuck there in the home. And so that's a really important question. I think one of the things that we'll see as things begin to open up and kids are going back to school and going back to their faith communities, going over to their friend's house, and just interacting more with trusted adults. I think we'll see a lot of reporting coming out of this. And I know in the meantime, CACs like Small Talk have been working really hard to be available to work with investigators on cases that really have to be done right now. They can't wait. And so I know you've been doing interviews in person when needed, and like you mentioned, transitioning the mental health services to telehealth, just to make sure that there isn't disruption in that. That's really important. I know that wasn't easy for a lot of CACs. They're used to doing in-person therapy, and then to make that switch to telehealth, it's a hard thing to do. And so I think that shows a great commitment on the CAC's part to make sure that those kids have access. And in fact, that's one of the things that I've heard CACs across the state doing when families don't have access because of maybe lack of internet, or maybe even a lack of not having hardware needed to interface with their therapist. I've heard of CACs bringing like a tablet to a family that wouldn't be able to connect with the child's therapist that way, or even just some other sort of basic needs that families we serve might have to do sort of these drop-offs, like Ding Dong Digit, right, where they drop off some supplies and get out of there, which I think, especially this time can feel so isolating. It can feel so lonely for so many of us, and I think to have those expressions where you just know that someone's thinking about you, that someone is sort of there for you, it can mean a lot. And so I've heard a lot of those sorts of stories. And I know that CACs have also been working really hard, especially as things open up, to ensure that the CACs are safe places for kids and families to come. And so, usually I know the waiting rooms are filled with toys, and things like that. And those are gone just because we just want to limit the shared things that lots of people touch, right? So I know that CACs have been cleaning their spaces, letting them sit unused as often as they can, use masks, do all of those sort of precautions that we need to make sure that it's a safe place for people to come. So CACs have been doing amazing work during this time and making sure that as much as possible people aren't falling through the cracks.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the most remarkable pieces of all of this, is that it's been obviously really challenging, I think, for everybody to adapt to this new normal that we have. But I think it's also really a testament to the greatness of the CACs in our state, that we are able to still adapt and still serve people despite all of the challenges that we're being faced with. And I mean, it's been, I know for us, and I'm sure for many other CACs, it's just been constant change, where it's one week it's, you should do this, the next week maybe you shouldn't do this, and we've had to adjust. And I think CACMI has been really great, and we've been having these director huddles too, where we're getting all of these great minds together to kind of come up with what are going to be the best practices for us, and how do we share that information. I know as a director of a CAC, that's something that I have found to be really helpful, is just this network of really awesome, they're all geniuses. I think there's so many smart people kind of at the table who when we're trying to make decisions and what's going to be in the best interest of not only our staff, but the kids that we serve, we have these great minds who are there to, kind of guide our state and, provide the best services to kids that we can under, unprecedented circumstances. So. Yeah. So, I mean, I think our last question is one that we ask all of our guests. There's a lot of talk about heroes, and, especially now, a lot of the unsung heroes, that maybe before this weren't really getting the appreciation they deserved. But, so what for you, Michael, what does a hero mean to you?
That's a great question. I think, it's something that, it's a status that we ascribe to others. And I think, we usually do that when, that other person has done something really good, or something that we value. And they've done it in an extraordinary way, right? And maybe in a way that it would have been easy not to do that. And so, really, it seems incredible to us, right? And we sort of ascribe that hero status to them. I actually, that question reminds me of a story that Fred Rogers, or Mr. Rogers as we know him, he said something about when he was a child, and he would hear about these scary things on the news. His mom would say to him, "Look for the helpers. There are always helpers. Look for the helpers." And I think it's such a wonderful description of what a hero is, right? That when there are scary things going on, there are people sort of running to that and in order to help others. And I think that's such a mark of a hero. I know in our work, sometimes we see the idea of hero perverted by abusers. People will take the trust of a child, their need for acceptance and love, and use that against the child. Maybe the child sees an adult as a hero, and that adult really uses that against the child to continue to hurt them. And it's really one of the most heartbreaking stories that I hear coming from CACs, when a child trusts an adult in that deep way, and have that experience with that adult. And I think, in terms of what we tell our friends and families, really all the adults that we know, they can be those helpers, right? I mean, they can be those heroes. There may be, we talked earlier about how common abuse is. Chances are really, really good that we, in some area of our lives, we are interacting with kids who have experienced abuse or who are experiencing abuse. And I think all of us adults, has the opportunity to be a helper, right? To be aware of, what are some of those signs that kids can show who've been abused. We can be trustworthy. We can be good listeners. We can be interested in them. We can just sort of be available. And I think, if we can be a helper and a hero to a kid who really needs that help. And so, I think in terms of heroes, I think, really any one of us can be. I hope that really, if the time comes and I need to step up, that I would do that. So, anyway, a few thoughts on what I think a hero is.
No, I think that's great. And I mean, Mr. Rogers is getting lots of shout outs on our show. I think that's like the third or fourth time. Well, no, when we've had other guests on, they've mentioned that same quote, the look for the helpers.
Oh, really?
It's just something that I think is, and I mean, Mr. Rogers is kind of a staple of just a good person that had just a good heart. And I think a lot of people, especially in times like this, that's the people that you look for guidance and assistance. So I think I'm very happy that he keeps coming up. I think it's good to keep that kind of spirit alive. That's a great thing. Yes. So yeah, well, we again want to thank you, Michael, for taking some time to talk with us, and we'll obviously be talking to you regularly. But yeah, so thank you again so much for taking the time. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much for inviting me to be a part of this. I was really excited. So,
good.
Thank you.
All right, great. Thanks.
Bye.
Yeah.